see that I am in peace, but my neighbor or the other one is living in violence, then I just won't say that it's none of my business. I will interfere. Love is not about a peaceful coexistence with violence. The question is, why must one interfere? If one is already at peace, then why must one interfere? At the basis of your question lies the assumption of individual salvation. You are assuming that one can be at peace while still being divided. You said, I am at peace. Mark your sentence. I am at peace. What is this I? An I that is still divided from the neighbor because it does not want to help, because it does not want to interfere. Is peace or liberation possible to the individual, to the fragmented unit that you and I are? Is it possible that this room is burning and everybody in this room is burning and I am at peace? But we feel so. Not only do we feel so, even our religious scriptures say that. They say that if you do the right things, then you will land in heaven. Do you see what they are communicating to us? What they are communicating to us is false. They are telling us that individual liberation is possible. They are saying that the fragment can be liberated. Do you see what is happening? They are saying that if you have done the right things, then you would be liberated. How can this I be liberated? This I itself is the bondage. There can be no liberation for the I. There can only be liberation from the I. But then we keep on making statements like these. We keep on saying, I am at peace. It is my neighbor who is in violence. How can you be at peace? I want to ask this, when your neighbor is in violence. How exactly? Don't you see that you and your neighbor are one? Don't you see that all life is one? If this hall is burning and there is the stench of burning flesh all around, I wonder how am I ever going to be at peace? How? What are you saying?
See, to my understanding, what I see is I don't know, I mean, this is just what I'm sharing. Spirituality or the liberation, it has got two stages. One is definitely what you said. If it's burning all around, how can you feel cool? You cannot ever feel cool. But then we hear the metaphor of Bhagat Prahlad. He's sitting in fire and he's not being burned. And it's obviously a message that is being conveyed by our scriptures, as you said. And in the second part, we say, somewhere down the line, you have to think about yourself to get that Advait in your own self. So drawing that line and understanding that right balance is the question. That's what I understand behind.
No, there is no question of balance in it. Any line that you draw would be drawn by you, the divided entity. Any thought that you have would be your thought, the thinker's thought, and the thinker himself is a division. And doesn't matter how hard you think, you would never be able to convince yourself to sit on flames like Prahlad. What do you think? Prahlad thought and then went to the fire? What thought can convince you? What thought? And if some thought can actually convince you, it would be probably the thought of a suicide bomber. He too thinks before committing himself to a violent death. We are not talking of that. We are not talking of doing it for ourselves and then doing it for the world. To realize is to see that you and the world are one, and the dividing line is called ego. The line that separates you from the world, that itself is the ego. Realization is a dissolution of the ego. Realization means that now you and the world are no longer separate. If you and the world are no longer separate, how is salvation possible for you when the world is still in bondage? Is that not obvious? And is that not what each of us keep trying? That let us have our own individual peace, even if the world is going to the, why I say dogs?
Yeah.
Dogs are wonderful. So it's a wrong proverb.
But here, when I just look at things, I mean, we take any spiritual guru or any saint in the past, we've seen him meditating, having his own space, and then preaching to the people who really want that peace. So these are two spheres. He's not gone outrightly as a social worker who just reform the society of people around.
No. You see, you are expecting a particular kind of action based on your image of social work. You are expecting that to reform the world, a Ramana Maharishi must go out and travel on foot and preach in every nook and corner of the world. It doesn't happen that way. Sitting where he is able to transform the world in a way that is difficult to think about. He is able to transform the world precisely because he doesn't see himself as different from the world. When you don't see yourself as different from the world, then whatever you do not do, is useful for the world. You don't have to conform to images. You don't have to say that unless I go and preach and act like the typical reformer, I am not helping the society. How do you know that he was not helping the society while sitting in his temple hall? How do you know? And there were others. Ramana Maharishi does not ever move. And there were others who kept on moving. They all had their ways, which were incidentally not their ways. One thing that is common to all of them is that none of them saw themselves as separate from anything. Separation is never real. I'm not advocating that you conform to a particular image of action. I'm not asking you to act like the proverbial helper, that saint of fairy tales who goes door to door preaching the truth. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that internally you must not feel divided. And after that, whatever you do is good for everybody. But if you feel that you can have your own little corner of peace while the world burns, then you are living in a utopia. It won't materialize. It is not going to happen. You see, this is what all of us want. Let my own house be clean, even as the road, the park, all are in squalor. Yes, that's what we do. Let my son flourish, even as the rest of the generation is down in dumps. Even if you give this attitude a spiritual name, it still remains the same self-centered, selfish attitude. If there is someone who says that I am going to meditate so that I will get my individual peace, then he is no better than the one who says I am going to earn so that I can have my individual bank account bloated. Individual peace and individual money are no different at all, because in both of them there is the sense of the individual, and the individual is the ego. The one who is not divided will not be contented with his personal relaxation. He will not, and for the purposes of this particular discussion, we have equated the individual with the personal. I hope that creates no confusion. So your personal relaxation, your personal realization None of these mean anything, because if realization is personal, then it is no realization at all. The person still remains. The divided individual still remains. When you talk of anybody who went on to live a life that is miraculous, remember that he had gone beyond his personhood. You named Prahlad. Prahlad couldn't have been thinking of the person, because the person is the body. If you are still thinking of the body, how will you leap into the flames? Are you getting it?
See, one question that I see here is, in every case, as we talked about a few names, the definition of word was different. When I am assuming, it is according to my vision, I see that pain happening outside, I should not sit here, I should send out my hand for that support, for that help.
No. It is not a question of sending out one's hand. Sometimes when you see pain outside, it is better not to do anything. It is not at all a question of a specific action. I am making this clear once again. We are not advocating action as per the humanitarian image or the charitable helper. We are not conforming to that image. We are talking of the internal assumption that I and the other one are different. If you extend your hand of help and still keep thinking that you are helping someone else, then your help is of no avail. And there might be another one who does not extend his hand, realizing fully well that he and the other are one. Then he is actually helping. If I say I am helping you, then what is it that I am still maintaining? Please tell me. The separation between me and you, now I cannot really help. This hand that has been stretched out to help will end up harming you. You will not realize how, but it would definitely harm. So it is not a matter of action. It is not a matter of whether the hand goes out to help or does not go out to help. It is a question of the center from where you act. Is the center a divided center, or is it the center of oneness? Yes.
So if we do not see both are separate, and if we see other person as I am, so we send help for helping other person. I mean, if I see other person as me, so in a way I'm gonna help.
No. You don't need to see the other person as yourself, because this.
If I don't see the other person separate.
You don't need to see the other person as anything. You don't need to see the other person as the other person. Let me just elucidate this. Separation is a thought. Unity is not a thought. If you will sit there and imagine that you and everybody sitting here are one, then you will go mad. Because you cannot imagine that. How will you imagine that? How will I imagine that me and my friend are one? How? But that's what we end up doing, right? We let thought and imagination go into places where they must not go. You can very well imagine that you are separate. That is the work of imagination. And we keep imagining that, right? You can very well keep thinking that you and the other one are different. That is imaginable. But if you want to imagine that we all are one, then that is nonsense. How will you imagine that? But that is what so many teachers keep preaching. That feel as if all of us are one. How will you feel that? Because if you are feeling that, then you are... Don't you see the contradiction? If you are feeling that, you are still you. Now I may keep feeling that you and me are one. But who is feeling? Me and you, or me? Who is the feeler? Is me and you feeling? Who is feeling? I am feeling. So separation is still there, equally there. But you can now live in an assumption, a dream, that I experience a oneness with everybody. And I meet so many of these people. You know what? When I close my eyes and meditate, I feel that me and the whole world are one. Excuse me and the whole world? Yes. Okay, fine. Forget about meditation, you don't even know semantics. You can't even observe language. It is not something to be imagined. So don't try to imagine. Imagining the unity of existence is the same as imagining God. If God is beyond imagination, how can this unity be imagined? So it is enough if you just check the imagination that you are separate. Are you getting it? You don't need to imagine that you are one. You only don't need to power the imagination that you are separate. Don't power that. That's all. And that happens when you are really at peace with yourself. Then you lose the distinction between you and the rest of it. That which you call as yourself becomes less and less important. And that is an indication of oneness taking possession of you. While when you are disturbed, when you are desirous, then you become the actor, acting upon something, wanting something, reaching somewhere, and that is a clear indication of separation. Me reaching somewhere. So me and the goal are separate.
Here, as this thing, applies a bit to me, and I guess to all. This morning, I'm just taking this to you. This morning, before coming here, I was reading a little about you. You were in IIT, you were in IIM, and many nice reputed organizations, and you stepped forward for a path, for peace, for something that was important to you. Did you actually then not divide a line that this is something that I have to go beyond? And was that not a dvaita, or was that not a dividing line as we were talking?
You see, the difference is not really there. If you are thinking purely about your self-interest, that is just the same as thinking about the entire universe. And that, mind you, is not a thought in the usual sense of the word. Please understand this. What we call as selfishness usually is a very half-baked selfishness. It's a very incomplete selfishness. We are not selfish at all. Had we been selfish, would we have acted as per the dictates of others? To be selfish means to be self-centered. The self is everything. But in our case, so much besides the self is important, is it not? Yes, that which we call as I is a very incomplete I, is it not? It relies on others, it is built up by others, it is afraid of others, it wants to achieve others, appease others. We are not really selfish. If one can look at his self-interest in the real sense of the word, then he is serving all and everyone. Are you getting it? You cannot, think about, sitting over here in this hall, how this discussion is going to help a leopard in the Amazon forests. You cannot imagine how this is going to help a penguin on the ice masses. Can you? I repeat, you will go mad if you start thinking how you are going to help everything and everybody. So what is the practical way out then? The practical way out is to see what purely helps you. What purely helps you helps the entire universe. Please, do you see this? We do not really know what would help us. If we know what would help us, we have also known what would help the other. If you and the other are one, then the source from where you and the other would be helped would also be necessarily one. Are you getting it? Find your own help. And once you have been helped, help flows through you in 1,000 unthinkable ways to the entire universe. You cannot think about those ways. I repeat, how will you think that this discussion is going to help a leopard in South America? How will you think? Tell me, how will you think? What kind of cause-effect chain will you imagine? What kind of cause? And you, even if you imagine, even if you cook up a story, how does that help? But it helps. Not only a leopard in the Amazons, it would also help the tiniest piece of life anywhere in the universe. It would also help that which you don't even categorize as life. The rivers, the mountains. Yes, but those are not things to imagine and then act as per imagination. You must first find out what your own center is. You must first know what your own hunger and thirst are. And if you have really found that out, then you cannot prevent yourself from being of help. I repeat, then you won't have to actively help. Then eating, sleeping, passively talking, you would be just helping. Your every breath would be an announcement of help. Are you getting it? You won't even have to stretch your hand. I am saying two things that may appear contradictory. In the first half of this question, I said you and your neighbor are not separate. How can you live without helping? And in the second half, I said you cannot imagine what it means to really help the other, because the other is a vast set. So you better forget about the other and look only at
Your betterment.
your own, yes, you may call it betterment. Look only at that. And when you look at that, then the other is automatically helped. But what can never help is the thought that if I am all right, why do I need to bother?
Correct.
That, no. So that's why in the book I had to write that if you are a man of love and if you find your neighbor in violence, then you would interfere. But this interference is not the typical interference that you know of. This is a passive interference. It's a passivity that may be active, that may not be active. At times you may need to barge into the neighbor's house. At times you may need to leave the neighbor to time. That you cannot determine, that you cannot predict. That's a function of intelligence. That is not something to be prescribed. That is, yes, you could say that. Yes, but never can right action come from a divided feeling. Yes.